recording. Please tell me that you exist. And then I'll ask one more time, are there any questions? Are we doing okay? All right. So, yeah, today is a non-programming lecture day. Let us begin talking about freedom of speech, communication, and open source. So, lots of nice little topics there for us today. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about is freedom of speech, because we know that that is like protected, right? At least in the US. But what does it mean on the internet? Because that's a different place. It's a new place, relatively. So let's see what's going on there. And let's ask the question, like, does our right to freedom of speech, right? That is a right. Does that apply to the internet even? Maybe there are some nuances and we should talk about them, okay? So, yeah, let us get started there. And the answer is yeah, more or less. The answer is yes, we do have a sense of freedom of speech on the internet even. This has not always been the case. If you read the textbook, you might read about some things that have come up and been struck down. Like there have been plenty of censorship laws that have been passed. Some went through, some got like struck down, thrown out in court. A lot of the time, the argument for those censorship laws is for the children, things like that. Everybody wants to protect what children are seeing on the internet. But that kind of, there's a tug of war going on between that and freedom of speech, right? Also, anonymity, which is a very powerful feature of the internet, right? That is, for the most part, protected as well on the internet. As long as you're not like doing something super horrible, you're allowed to post things anonymously, and that is just an accepted right that you have, okay? So, yeah, there's a lot of topics to pick out of this idea, and so let's go on into each of them. The first one I'd like to talk about is censorship. Okay, what does it mean to censor stuff on the internet? What does it mean to, like, can you burn a page of the internet or something? Is that possible? So let's figure out what all that means, right? Okay, so, yeah, one way to censor the internet, which has been done by many a country, is to censor search results. So when you search for something, normally some topic would come up, but you can ban that and not allow it to come up, some issue, some idea. And then just websites in general, if you try to go to some website and it has been blocked, it has been censored, you'll just not get through, okay? So that's one way that you can censor the internet. And China, for example, that has actually come back up again because of the Olympics, right? And everybody's there now. China has banned a bunch of Western internet sites, right? Like Facebook, Wikipedia, and Google. So those are not accessible inside of China without a VPN, of course, okay? So we can talk about that in detail if you'd like, but that is one good example of censorship happening still today. Google.cn, CN stands for China, used to exist and followed Chinese law up until 2010. And Google was responding to China asking them to take off some pieces of the internet that normally would be shown to other people in other countries. Okay, and their idea behind that was that some access is better than no access at all. Google was still providing at least some amount of service, some amount of free speech to the Chinese people, and so they kept it there for that reason. So, yeah, Google was responding to these like takedown ideas from the government. So anything, let's just spell this out, anything China wanted taken down, got taken down. So that's something that happened. And then remember, back in the day, the U.S. considered banning TikTok even, because that was the other side of that bargain, right? You're banning Facebook, Wikipedia, and Google. TikTok is a Chinese company, so let's just ban TikTok. That didn't end up happening, right? But it used to be an idea back in the day, a year or two ago, right? Google eventually got out of Google.cn, and they only made available Google.hk for Hong Kong, which had a bit more freedom at the time. I don't actually know what's going on there right now because of a lot has gone on with Hong Kong recently. But that's all that I know. Any questions, comments about this kind of stuff? So censorship is alive and well on the internet. Depends where you are, who you ask. All right. So that's censoring just individual pages and like certain keywords. You can go further than that. Let me get some water first. You can just shut down the internet. That works too. So this has totally happened as well. So countries have shut down the internet for the entire country in response to some kind of civil unrest. Because a lot of the time, smaller countries at least, they have access. They like control the entire infrastructure that makes up the internet in their country. So they have access to infrastructure. Usually the internet is state-owned for these countries. So 2 examples. In 2011, we had the Egyptian Revolution, and back then the government just shut down the internet for a little while because that was, of course, what protesters were using to talk to each other on and gather, right? So Egypt just shut down the internet for a little bit because of that. Same thing happened in 2016. There was a Turkish coup back then, right? And so they didn't block the entire internet, but they cut off Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all those places where people could come together and like talk about things, okay? Because people were using social media to organize themselves, specifically. To organize. Any questions about that? So yeah, this is relatively recent stuff. It happens. All right, so that's censorship. Let's talk about anonymity. So what does that mean? And should people even be allowed to be anonymous on the internet? That's a question you might be able to ask or want to ask. Let me give you some arguments either way. So first argument has to do with satellite map data, which is mostly publicly available, freely available on the internet, right? Like Google Maps, you go there and you can look at anything because they took pictures of the entire Earth, right? So what goes on there? Satellite map data. So South Korea, for example, they wanted Google to get rid of the presidential house, the place where their president lives, pictures of all their power plants, where those were, and pictures of all their military installations, right? They wanted those gone from any public-facing part of the internet. And their argument was for safety reasons, right? Because they're very close and not very nice. They're not doing too well with North Korea, right? And so they worry that these might be targets. Okay, so they like them to be as hard to access as possible. So yeah, they kind of weren't able to get rid of all of it. But here's like the Google normal view of the presidential house. It's not there, but if you go on satellite view, it is there. I took a screenshot back in the day. It might still be like this. But yeah, that was their trade-off, I guess. So that's something that is that happens. These people wanted to not be on the internet in some places, and that was okay. All right, so we might ask the question, is this fine? Is this allowed? Is this something that Google should be allowed to do, to take off pieces of itself upon request? And so we might ask, like, what would Kant say about this? What would Mill say about all of this? If you ask Kant, he's probably going to ask the question, like, should you always be allowed to, like, fend for yourself, to like, show yourself when you want to show yourself? And I think he would say yes to that. So it's okay to hide yourself, probably. He's for individual rights, of course. It's okay to hide yourself. So he might say that. And then for Mill, you could go either way. It's like, yeah, probably for safety reasons, it's probably a good idea to allow that. But I mean, plenty of tourists want to go and visit and take pictures next to this house, so maybe it should be allowed to be shown on the internet so they can get there, something like that. Okay? So again, you can go back and forth with these ideas, but I'm just giving you both sides. Okay? So that's anonymity with satellite map data. We good with that? All right, because I got more examples today, plenty of them. The next thing that I want to talk about is the Federalist Papers. You guys remember these? So these were written in favor of the Constitution, right? Back in the day, they were written by 3 separate people, by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, and they were all published anonymously, if you didn't know that. That's why a lot of people still can't be sure precisely like which Federalist Papers Hamilton actually wrote, because he never signed his name next to them. And so you have to do really cool textual analysis of all this stuff to see, like, okay, Hamilton probably wrote these and not these other ones. So people still argue about that today. But yeah, these were published anonymously because, one reason, because the authors were well known. They only wanted to get their ideas across. They didn't want to have those ideas be associated with their names to further bias people, I think, was their idea. Because they were so well liked, they were so accepted, they might have made people biased about these topics, and they wanted them to think for themselves. Okay, so that was the Federalist Papers. Also, it was very common to want to publish something anonymously at the time. That was just a normal thing to want to do. Don't sign your name, just give your thoughts without having to attach a name to it, which is weird to think about, but it was a common thing back then. Also, it was back in the day, I think you would have learned about this in English class by now, right? It was frowned upon for women to be writers, to publish books. So they would often use pen names, pseudonyms that were male-sounding names. And so again, that's an example of anonymity, right? We don't know who these people are, we just assume them by this name, okay? Isn't that interesting? So anonymity has a very long history, especially in this country. Cool, huh? So this is like at the founding part of this country. This all was a very, very important topic back then even. Okay, so let me show you some cool stuff now. There are some fun websites that we can look at and see like some interesting features that exist on the internet, some things that we can notice, some information that is available to us that maybe shouldn't be, and let's see what's going on there. Okay, so what I'd like to show you first is CaliforniaBirthIndex.org. So let's go there. Hopefully it still exists and will let us all go there at once. So here is CaliforniaBirthIndex.org. What they did is they compiled records of everybody who was born between 1905 and 1995. Apparently, if you go to a hospital, you can just ask for their birth records. It's totally a normal thing to do. And you can get access to all of this information, and they put it on the internet for free. Okay, so if maybe not you, but like your parents, your grandparents were born in California, you can look them up, and they are here. Like I am here. Weird. So let's see the kind of information that you can do. This is all public domain information, okay? So let's look up Phoebe Bridgers, because why not? And let me tell you some interesting information. So this is the kind of stuff that they store. Like, okay, here's your birth date, your birth county, your mother's maiden name even. And this, back in the day on Wikipedia, was not there. So this was extra information that was not publicly available anywhere but this website. So you can ask the question, like, is that okay? Is that a normal thing to want to have? Like, should all these records be available on the internet for everybody to see? If you don't want them to see it even. So, is this okay? That's a weird question. Of course, all that information is now on her Wikipedia page, but didn't used to all be there. Crazy, huh? Is that okay? Any thoughts, comments about that? Look up yourself or your parents. Also, if you have siblings, it also says it has links to all of your likely siblings if you look up somebody on this page as well. It's really cool. Phoebe's brother is too young for this though. Otherwise he would have been on here. So that is CaliforniaBirthIndex.org. That might be getting you a little bit uncomfortable. Let me make you even more uncomfortable, at least if you are Swedish. So here is a website called hitta.se, I guess. And I think this means to find SE for Sweden. And this is like CaliforniaBirthIndex.org, but a whole lot more involved. So there's a ton more information than what there was on this page. Okay, so let's look up the name Lars Anderson on this website, because that's apparently Sweden's equivalent of like the most common name ever. That's their John Smith. So let's look up Lars, all the different Larses in Sweden, and if anybody can read Swedish, that would help. But it looks like there are a ton of them, and you can go down and you can click on any of these. How about this Lars? So look what we have. We have birthdays, the price of his house, we have his phone number, who he lives with, same last name, so maybe his wife. Crazy, right? That's even more information, and now we have a picture of him on a map. Is that okay? Should that be allowed? What if we had that for us? Is that too much? Where do you draw the line? Any questions about that? That's pretty interesting. Oh man. So, yeah. Anonymity on the internet. What would happen if you were Lars? Okay, so I think I have made you uncomfortable enough for now. Let's have a debate. Okay, so please humor me and go to the written ice page, and I will clear it out. And what I'd like you to do with your group, as you get into your groups, is think about how you would respond to this debate question. So, should people be allowed to remain anonymous on the internet? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Please write down 2 good arguments as a group, and I'm about to give you your topics or your viewpoints, okay? So I'm going to force you to think one way. So if you're an even group number, I want you to think that anonymity is good, okay? Anonymity is good. If you're an odd group number, I want you to think that anonymity is bad. So take a few minutes and try to get down 2 good arguments for your group in response to this. Should people be allowed to remain anonymous on the internet? Okay? Why or why not? I'm going to give you a couple more minutes. All right, one more minute as I hear the voices start to die down, and we'll talk about this together. Don't let me forget to give you your next essay as well. I must remember that. All right, hopefully that was enough time to get some good ideas in. Well, let's take a look. Let's see what we're thinking. Dun, dun, dun. So let's go somewhere to the middle. Look at an even group and an odd group. So even was good, odd was bad. Okay, so let's see some bad stuff. Dun, dun, dun. If you have nothing to hide, then why hide your identity? That is that's one of those standard arguments against anonymity. Like, if you have nothing to hide, then why would you ever want to be anonymous? And I'm sure you can think, well, maybe see Group 20 counters some of that. Many negative things are done on the internet through anonymity. Yes, it is very, it has been proven, right, that if you don't have to attach your name on the internet to something, people are in general meaner, less accepting. It's very unfortunate, and that there have been studies about that kind of stuff. So there are some unfortunate sides to anonymity, that is for sure, and that was one of them. But let's see some counters to that. Group 20, let's take a look. So Group 20 thinks that anonymity is good, right? So if you have the right to refrain from stating your name in real life, then you shouldn't have to on the internet. That's a great idea. I like that argument a lot. Like, I can go walk into a store to look around. They're not asking me for my name, right? They're not going to not help me unless I give them my name and like my email or something to show me ads or something. That is totally allowed, right? In real life, you're allowed to be anonymous. You can go wherever you want. Nobody's going to ask for your name unless like they're a police member or something. That is a very cool argument. I've not heard that one before. Privacy is a privilege everyone should have the right to. Yeah, that is also something that is protected, right? Privacy is a protected right in the U.S., right? Something like that. So that's another good argument. So thank you, Group 17 and Group 20, for being my guinea pigs as I look at your ideas. Any other groups want to share what they came up with? Any good ideas that they would like to shout out or talk about? All right. Yes, this is to get you thinking. Potentially, to get you thinking in a way that you don't agree with. That's even better, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. So thank you for that debate. Let us keep on trucking then if we're okay. Any questions? You all right? Okay. So the next thing I want to get into is open source software. A very, very popular place to be. to work in. Source, if you haven't heard that word before, it's like the source of what? Like a river? This just is short for source code, right? So program code. Let's talk about open source software, because it didn't really become very popular until just a few decades ago. So let's talk about it. So open source software kind of answers the question of, what can I do if I don't trust software, people who make it, and I also don't want to pay for any software, right? So what in the world could I do? Well, one thing you can do is use open source software. Let me tell you why. So, for example, I'm using PowerPoint right now. PowerPoint, Microsoft Office in general, is called closed source. Microsoft, that is an R, Office is closed source, not open source. So what that means is nobody, like Microsoft is not at all going to want to share the source code for PowerPoint, for example, with anybody, because then they could copy it, make their own version, and nobody would have to pay for this very, very lucrative Microsoft Office 365 or whatever it's called, right? That would be unfortunate for them. So they're not going to share their hard worked on software, okay? And so for us, the users, we just get the file that we can run, like it's called powerpnt.exe or something like that. And we can run that on our Windows computers, and it opens up PowerPoint. But we have no clue like what's going on under the hood. It's like a black box, this program, as far as we're concerned. If we were cool hackers, we could look at this compiled code and infer some stuff about it. But as humans, as beginning computer scientists, we are not yet capable of that. So we kind of just have to trust that Microsoft is doing some cool, okay stuff, and we should trust them and give them money to make fancy PowerPoint updates for us, okay? So that is closed source software. That is in contrast to open source software. Here are two examples, one you know and one you will know soon, Scratch and Python. Those are both examples of open source software, okay? So Scratch, for example, is available completely for free, right? We go to a website, we get to use it all we want, not a big deal. Also, all the source code, it's weird to think about programming a programming language, but that is a thing. All the source code for the Scratch language is available. You can go and look at it if you'd like. There's really cool source code licenses that have fancy names that you can go and look up. But yeah, look at Scratch's Wikipedia page, and it talks about the open source-ness of it, okay? Let's go and zoom back out. So you could look at, if you don't trust it, you're allowed to look at all the source code, read it yourself, see what's really going on. That is one tenet of open source software. The other is you are allowed to build on top of it, if you'd like. You can build Scratch 2.0. Maybe you're forced to call it something else, but you're allowed to take that code and change it and do whatever you want to it. That is another feature of open source software, okay? You get to do this, look at it, you get to build on top of it as well. Those are common rights that you are granted as a user of open source software. Okay, Python as well, and once we get into that, Python is open source as well, and you can build on top of it if you'd like. Any questions about that idea of being open source? Let's talk about next, a very, very important piece of open source software called Linux. Maybe you've heard of this term before. So Linux is a very, well, it is 1 year older than me. It is an open source operating system, okay? Which is really cool to think about. They have their own mascot. It is a penguin for reasons. And Linux is everywhere, right? It is, it's on every Android phone. It is on every website. Like you connect to the class server, you connect to Facebook, really anywhere. Maybe not the school's website because they're forced to use Microsoft stuff, but pretty much every website ever, other than people who are forced to use Microsoft products, are giving you stuff on the internet. Their servers are all powered by Linux. Okay, so what, you might ask, is an operating system? That is a program that runs programs. That's my best definition of that. A program that runs programs. So Windows is an operating system. Mac OS is an operating system. It is just a program that has its own versions of programs that it can run. Okay, and it keeps that all in check for you. It knows how to run programs, like I just said, runs programs. It manages all your memory. Make sure, hopefully, you don't run out of it. Manages memory. It manages all your files. If you want to delete a file, you got to talk to the operating system, things like that. You want to copy a file. That is all part of what the operating system is in charge of, and there's plenty more, etc. So it's a very powerful piece of a computer, and Linux is a completely free, open source operating system. I think you can tell why it's so why it's on the internet everywhere, why every server is running Linux, because it's super cheap, right? Completely free to put it on your computer. That's mostly why people use it, but it is also very powerful. It is it is competing, right, with Windows. It's competing with Mac OS. Any questions about that? Very important. All right. What else? Linux, I would be doing a disservice to talk about Linux without talking about, this is an acronym. If you were reading it for the first time, you'd say GNU, but apparently you pronounce it as GNU, okay? Even though there is a word, lowercase, called this that is pronounced not that, but new, with a little nye, right? So it's very weird. This is apparently an animal as well, and that's how it's pronounced when it's an animal. But what it stands for is GNU is not Unix, which is funny because it's a recursive definition. We'll get into that later in this class, but you will eventually laugh at that. And GNU software powers Linux. Usually, if you want to be perfectly precise, you don't say, hey, my computer is running Linux. You say, hey, my computer is running GNU/Linux. Because Linux is like the kernel, the very important piece of the operating system, and then GNU is all the software that helps it interact with things. Okay, so GNU, the GNU project is a collection of free software. It's just a bunch of different little things, and it is used to power pretty much every single Linux distribution except for a very, very few. Okay, embedded stuff, things like that. But if you haven't heard of any of these terms before, don't worry. Maybe one day you will take CSCI 40 and you will get very, very, very acquainted with Linux, with GNU software. So I'll just have you wait until then, okay? But let's talk about the man who founded GNU, because this came before Linux, okay? GNU was kind of like the very first piece of open source software invented or founded by a man named Richard Stallman, who was like the founder of the open source movement, essentially. So he has a lot of very, very out there ideas, I would say, different ideas. He believes, for example, that every program ever, even including PowerPoint, even including Windows, all programs should be free and have their source code available. So you can see why he invented the idea of open source software and this very important piece of it, the GNU project. Okay, so we'll come back to Mr. Stallman a little bit later, but these two slides go hand in hand, and they power most of the internet and a lot of our devices. So important to talk about. Okay, any questions before I move on to something slightly similar but a bit different? A slightly new topic. I'd like to go back to intellectual property again. Now that we know some more stuff, let's talk about it in a bit more depth, okay? And apply it to freedom of speech and things like that. So, yeah, there are a lot of corner cases. I'm sure you remember those from last time we talked about this. Let's talk about some more interesting features of intellectual property, especially in the U.S., all the laws that are going on there. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is called fair use. So, this is when you want to reuse copyrighted stuff. So stuff that somebody has copyrighted that only they're allowed to sell, but you want to reuse that stuff for a certain purpose, and sometimes you're allowed to when it's under something called fair use, okay? And this is actually a very good example of the US being utilitarian. Most countries are when it comes to fair use. So here are the rules. If you want to reuse copyrighted work in a certain way, you're allowed to, as long as you uphold these rules, as long as you don't copy too much of the work, you don't set up a photocopier and print off the entirety of a textbook and give it to somebody. That's too much. That's not fair use. Or if you are somehow keeping the creator of that product that was copyrighted from making money on that product, then it's also not fair use, okay? But as long as you're not doing anything weird like that, as long as you honor those rules above, you are allowed to reuse all this work. What is this? Let's delete it. Yeah, so here are some examples of accepted fair use. So, for example, something that I could do today right now would be to take a chapter of a textbook, copy it, and give it to everybody here. I'm allowed to do that. So excerpts of a book reproduced for students. I can't give you the whole book, but I can give you a chapter of it. And that is definitely fair use. I can take a book and put it on a copier, give you these pages. That's totally fine, okay? That's fair use because you are not selling it. I'm not selling it to you. We're just using it in class, right? For knowledge purposes. That is fair use. You're also allowed to reproduce a small amount of music. A short amount, maybe. Small amount of music. And this is why, for example, you are allowed to have 30 seconds of a song on your YouTube video before you get a copyright strike. 31 seconds, then it's too much, but 30 seconds, then you're fine. Something like that. And that's fair use is also behind the idea of all those reaction videos, right? That's a total fine example of fair use. If you're replaying that video to add on to it, something like that. So yeah, any questions about this? Because that kind of goes against the idea of copyright, doesn't it? Interesting. So that's a very nice thing that we're allowed to do. Okay, so that's fair use. Let's bring this back to piracy now, because I think this is fun to think about. Let's see, I was doing this for when I was on Zoom, but I guess we could do it in class too. So if you'd like to play along, please give me a thumbs up if you think that this is yes, piracy, this thing I'm about to say, or give me a thumbs down if you think no, it's not piracy. Okay? So do you think recording TV shows is or is not piracy? Yes or no? Thank you. So yeah, that's surprisingly legal, right? Back in the day, I don't know if you guys remember the term, or you were even born when the term TiVo came out. It was the first video recording thing that was not having to do with VHS tapes, but that was very controversial, as well as back when tape recorders came out and people started recording their TV shows, long before that even. So that is absolutely legal. That's fair use, and a lot of people tried to make that not be a thing. The broadcasters really hated that. Okay, how about this? Is this piracy? Dun dun dun. Copying a GameCube game using a DVD burner, because apparently they're all just little tiny DVDs. You can copy those. Is that piracy or is that not piracy? Yes or no? What do you think? All right, now we're not so sure, right? Yeah. So this is surprisingly okay again. This is fine. It's another case of fair use, as long as, and this is key, as long as you're making a backup of it. You're not giving it to someone else. It's just for you, just in case your dog eats the first one. That is fine, crazily enough. Okay, so that's weird. Okay, then, I think we can all agree that giving the copy to your friend, that is totally yes piracy. Okay, that is not legal, but the other ones are. Isn't that weird? Any comments, questions about that? Wow. Yeah, this is, if you remember VHS tapes, this VHS recorders, that was sparked a lot of controversy then. All right, so yeah, that's really weird to think about, especially this one. You wouldn't think that copying a game would be legal, but it is, as long as it's for personal use. Another weird thing, let's talk about reverse engineering, okay? Let's talk about emulators. Dun, dun, dun. Maybe you've heard of these before. A video game emulator, emulator. What that is usually when you're emulating something, you're writing a program to pretend it's something else. So as far as video game console emulators are concerned, it's when you're turning software and making it pretend it's hardware. Okay, so converting an old product like a GameCube to software, converting hardware to software. Crazy. Computers are powerful enough to emulate an old piece of hardware in code these days. Crazy enough. So yeah, let's talk about this. So reverse engineering, first of all, that's another topic. Let's talk about that as well. That is when you take something apart just to see how it's made. Like you look at the source code of something, or you open up your laptop to see what's going on. That's essentially reverse engineering, right? You're trying to look at what's going on under the hood, okay? And courts have ruled in favor, I guess we had to go to the courts for this, but they've ruled in favor of reverse engineering video game consoles. They're not sold anymore. People want to do cool stuff with them still. They want to understand how they worked, how they were made. That is apparently okay to do, at least in the US. That is fine. You're allowed to reverse engineer a video game console if you would like to. You're allowed to make an emulator for an old console like a GameCube or a Wii or older stuff, right? And the argument that came out of the courts, the reason that they support this, is that the purpose of doing this reverse engineering was always to add to that, what's the right word? To add to that community, right? They wanted to, the people who were trying to reverse engineer this stuff were trying to make new games. They were trying to see like what made their old games so special so that they could make cool new ones. So they could upgrade the ones that they have, like reskin it and do cool stuff. So those are called creative works based on an original work. And that is totally fair use, okay? That's totally fine. And the purpose of that reverse engineering was not to copy that hardware and resell like your own version of a GameCube to somebody else, okay? It was always for free again, okay? So that is, that's the idea. It's a weird thing to think about, but it's totally allowed. And a very popular emulator that works for both GameCube and Wii games, that is totally legal, is called Dolphin. And there's a lot of cool stuff that they're still working on. It's a very powerful emulator. Maybe you've heard of it. Any questions about that? All right. So yeah, I don't have much more to talk about today, but there were a lot of different things that we covered. Very, very interesting things. I guess the third to last thing that I want to talk about today is DRM. Have we heard of that acronym before? DRM. Very controversial. Stands for Digital Rights Management. And let me try and explain it in a picture. So it's meant to control uses of intellectual property, okay? Making sure that somebody can only do one thing but not another thing. And it's when this intellectual property is in a digital format that DRM comes into play. It's D for digital, right? Digital rights management. And so here's essentially what DRM does. It is, again, very controversial. What it does is every time you want to do something, like let's pretend that we have a DRM locked video game, for example. Let's stay on that topic. Every time you want to play that game, you have to ask the DRM box, hey, can I use this thing? Can I play this game, please? Can I play this song? DRM also used to be associated with buying digital music. So you ask DRM, hey, can I use this? And it will either say yes or no, and that will control whether or not you're allowed to access that thing that you probably bought. So yes or no, one way or another. It's allowed to make that decision for you, which is the root of its controversialness. Okay, so yeah, the idea of DRM is the producer of this content, the maker of this video game, the publisher of this song that is locked via DRM. They can control how you are using that thing. They can make it so that you cannot install more. You can't install this game on more than 2 computers. You can't have this song on more than 5 devices at once. Something like that. Okay. So that's what DRM gives you. And unfortunately, a lot of bad things have happened because of it. Like video games that had to play this game that had to connect to a DRM server somewhere else to be able to ask, hey, can I please play this game right now? I promise it's just me on my own computer. Once those DRM servers that were giving you back that yes or no answer, they went down because the game was so old, that means that that old video game is now unplayable. You cannot start it up even if you just want to play it by yourself. Crazy, huh? When the DRM servers got shut down because it was so old. Everybody wanted to play the game and now they couldn't, even though it used to be allowed. Okay, so that's weird to think about. And then a very common thing that is still under DRM is probably textbooks. I'm sure you've all purchased electronic textbooks by now, right? And those are locked via DRM, right? You're not allowed to open it up. You're not allowed to print it usually, right? You're not allowed to put it on multiple devices. You definitely can't resell it. You can't resell a virtual textbook like you could a physical one, which sucks. So, yeah, digital rights management, good or bad? You can ask that question and think about it in both ways. Yeah? Any questions about that? All right, let's keep on trucking then. So, let's keep going to software patents now. Oh my. So, let's see what has to go on there. I have some examples here as well. So, software patents. What is a patent, first of all, we might ask? That is when it's kind of like a copyright, right? It's when you make something, though. It's when you make something and you want to have the rights to sell it, something like that. So the question is now, should you be able to patent software, something that is not like physical? Like, I can patent this this monitor in front of me because it's made in this very special way by this specific process. But software, like, it's all intangible. That's weird to think about, right? Should you be allowed to patent intangible things? To patent intangible things. And we can ask this question. And probably argue both ways, right? So, is this a good idea? And obviously, if we were to ask Richard Stallman, he has some very strong views on this subject, and he would say absolutely not. Okay? And he has his reasons. So let's think about like why he might think that and why some people might disagree with him. Okay? So in argument 4, here are the best ones that I could come up with. In argument 4, software patents is that just like textbooks and things, it makes it so that the makers of that software get paid for the thing that they made, right? That helps them stay in business. This is a very utilitarian concept, right? That helps them stay in business. That helps them make future versions of that software so that they can have that lined up for people to buy. And it also helps so that they can sue if they want to, right? Because now they have a patent that they can throw at somebody when they sue them, right? It makes it so that their software can't be copied, can't be stolen as easily, because it is protected behind a patent. So that's one argument for. But you could also go the other route. This is what Richard Stallman might think. It's software is completely different from a piece of hardware. that I am making in front of me that's made of silicon and a bunch of fancy chips and wires. Software is more of just like an idea, right? It's just an idea that anybody should be allowed to recreate. Like PowerPoint, what's PowerPoint? It's just like two windows. One has like pictures of slides. One has like a picture of the current slide. And then there's like a bar on the top with some buttons. Should you patent that? Is that okay? Maybe you shouldn't. Like, why can't somebody else make the same kind of thing? As long as they mix it up just a little bit, right? So it's just an idea. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to patent something that precisely. And there are different flavors to this. Of course, Google Slides exists, and they're not getting sued by Microsoft. So there is some leeway, but maybe it just shouldn't exist ever, this idea of patenting software. Okay? Any thoughts, questions about that? Yes?
Do you think that Stallman would be okay with like normal patents, or is he like hardcore, everything's open source?
That's a good question. I think, from what I have read, now I'm doubting myself. You might want to look this up. I have a feeling it could go either way. It depends on the thing. It depends on the day. But I'd like to think that he is for patents sometimes. Potentially. I'm not sure, though. Specifically, medicine, he'd probably be against that as well. Because he wants everybody to enjoy all that stuff. But, yeah, I'm not sure of the answer. I'll have to look that up. It's a great question, though. Any others? Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, now there's a separation between the maker and the distributor. That's crazy. That's legally hairy, I would assume. So yeah, this is a great discussion. Any other ideas? We'll have to look up Mr. Stallman after we finish these slides, see what he might think. But yeah, okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is search engines. Before I get into your essay, because you have an essay due, I know I should release a new one. Let's talk about search engines regarding intellectual property and fair use. Because when you search for something on Google, right, or DuckDuckGo, if you're very conscious of privacy, search engines are going to copy a lot of things, aren't they? They have to crawl, that's the technical term, they have to crawl the web so that they can know what you're searching for and give you back things that you care about, right? Also, when you search for something, they have to show you little snippets on that page of things so that you can figure out, oh yes, I want to click on this link because it has those words that I cared about. Like here's all the pages that Google is showing me, right? And so this is another very, very important case or opportunity for fair use. You have to have fair use if you want to make a search engine. You have to be allowed to go over somebody's website and copy pieces of it so that you can show it to somebody later. And that will bring that person to your website, so it's in your favor to let this happen. But fair use is an old concept that still applies today on the internet. Okay? Any questions about that idea? Some things do carry over well enough to the digital age. All right. If we're all doing okay, let me release your next essay. Let me confirm that this is the one that I want to talk about, right? Yeah, this will be due week 8. Let's make sure this is going to work out. Yeah. All right. So here is your next essay after the one that you will be turning in this week. Due week 8. So here it is. It's a 750-word essay, and here is your prompt. So you may have heard of this back when air travel was a common occurrence, right? Customs officials, when you're entering a new country, if you're traveling internationally especially, right? customs officials have asked people to unlock their phones before they let them in the country so that they could look at what is on their phone. Okay? So what I'd like you to do is respond to this idea. Like, what are your thoughts about this? Is that all right? Should it be always allowed? Should it be never allowed? Should it be allowed in certain cases? I want you to tell me what you're thinking. Okay, so this is a good example for a good opportunity to argue things. Okay, so please explain what you're thinking, explain that answer, and please talk about both sides of the argument, because you're usually going to shoot one down and then prop the other up, right? So I want to hear about both sides because that's what makes a good argument. And yeah, so write 750 words about this, and I want you to find some sources on this topic as well. So please cite 2 sources at least in this 750 word essay. Okay? Any questions about this one? Does that make enough sense? Did I click the publish button? Yeah, cool. So yeah, that is officially all that I have for us today. So please take the rest of time to work on whatever you need to work on, and I'll be here to answer your questions as usual.